Kate, do you think campaigns are won on fear? Can they, in fact, be won on love and hope, as Noel Pearson suggests?
It's a damn sight easier to win them on fear, because it's really easy to make people feel concerned, not confident, and the, if you don't know, say no type slogan. I'd like to say, if you don't know, find out, because there's any amount of information out there. But it is easy to make people feel uncomfortable, not sure, and therefore don't want any change. The reality is that our challenge now is to get to people across Australia, and for me, people who vote Liberal or on the Conservative side of politics, to get them to find out a bit more about what this is really about. And the fact that it's pretty simple. It's recognising Indigenous people as Australia's first people, statement of fact, through a voice to Parliament, which is consultative, which helps politicians, which I used to be one, to have a mechanism to consult with Indigenous people, to get advice from Indigenous people on the sort of policies that will work for them and their local communities. And that's what this is about. It's not scary, it's not a whole lot of the things that have been said. That's what it does. And our challenge is to get that message out to Australians, and then the love comes in.
Is the fear of the unknown a legitimate fear in this circumstance?
Look, I think there's any amount of information out there. So I think when we say there's no information, it's all too scary, whatever. I'm sure that Marcia Langton and Tom Calma, with their quite significant report on how a voice might work to Parliament, must just shake their heads. So there's lots of information. There's been select committees. There's been, over the last 10 years, mostly, by the way, commissioned by coalition governments over that 10-year period. All of it has good, solid information on why recognition's important and why you can't just say, we'll just recognise Indigenous Australians, but not how. That makes it ornamental, to say the least. So I think the fact that we've talked about how we're going to do this, how we're going to recognise Australia's first people and do it in a consultative way, not a way that they can tell Parliament what to do. Parliament remains on top of all of this. It remains being the legislator, putting together the bill, determining how the voice works. All that happens in Parliament. So it's not scary, but people have to take a little bit of effort to have a look.
So that information is out there. Barnaby, I want to bring you in. The referendum, in essence, is really about recognising Narelda, myself, Nova, Karen and other First Nations people in our Constitution. But the debate seems to have become more about everything else than the words that are going to go in the Constitution. Everything from the length of the Uluru Statement, welcome to countries, treaties, Thomas Mayo and communism is brought up, Qantas has been brought up. We're now having a debate about You're the Voice and John Farnham. What's the strategy here? Why are all those other things lumped in and being talked about when we're really talking about 94 or so words that are going to go in our Constitution?
Because, John Paul, I think that it's not about emotion versus fear. I think it's about emotion versus fact. Now, I also find it, because I live in black-white communities. Bulbrook can't get much more black-white than that, and this is hurting us, because people who've lived their whole lives together are trying to politely work out how this dance goes. We still don't know what the legislation about the voice is. There are two different issues. There's constitutional recognition of Aboriginal people. In my area, they call themselves Aboriginal, so I'm going to say Aboriginal people. And there's the voice. And the voice is the one where all the problems are happening, because we don't know what the ledge is. And people say it's advice to Parliament. No, it's a lot more than that. The word advice is not even in the constitutional question. It's a capacity for people to have representations. And I tell you what, if I go to the High Court, I want legal representation, not legal advice. And so those parts which I think the Australian people, John Paul, are entitled to know, there's just been a big gap there. And of course, where there's a gap, whether it's us or someone else, that noise will go in there. It has to, because nature abhors a vacuum, and a vacuum has been left in this debate. And people should have come out and said, OK, we're going to be fair dinkum with you. Here's the voice ledge. I'll tell you one thing they can do in buildings like this, John Paul, they can drop ledge. And I bet you there's that ledge sitting around in a draft form, but they just don't want to show us it yet. And as soon as we get to the point where, whichever way this goes, I mean, it's hard for me. I go to NAIDOC week. I see mates there from Tinga, and it's hard for me because I say, I'm a no, and they go, yeah, Joyce, we kind of picked that bit up. And
well,
and I have to try and work out how we land this at the end of the day.
You're a member of the Liberal Party, and over the last 10 years, the Liberal and the Nationals have been governing together. What do you make of the No campaign they're running?
Oh, look, I'm pretty horrified, I'd have to say, because it does pull in a whole lot of things that aren't related to this. And, in the Constitution, there's no detail about anything. It says the federal government will run defence. Doesn't say how, it doesn't say what the legislation might look like. The fact is our Constitution sets in place things like we will recognise Indigenous Australians, Australia's first people, through a voice to Parliament. Doesn't then have, and here's the copy of the legislation as it might be. What it does then is says the federal Parliament, the people who set all the laws that Barnaby's part of, will put together the legislation that determines the makeup, how it's going to work, what it's going to look like, but it must do that. If we say yes, federal Parliament will have to come up with legislation that determines how it will work, and all elected representatives will have a capacity to be part of that. And also the important bit, it can be tweaked over time. So if it's not working as well as we'd like, then it can be changed.
But Barnaby, you've been fairly consistent with comments that you've made that the amendment to the Constitution reinserts race into the Constitution. Last year you compared the Voice proposal to Nazi Germany. You claimed that it would reinsert racial distinctions in the Constitution. Race already exists in the Constitution.
Sure.
Can you understand why people are accusing you of spreading misinformation?
Well, yeah, I kind of deal with them in seriatim. Okay, first thing, because I think the 1933 Civil Service Act, which I actually at the state, I said, in a vastly, and that's the word I use, more noxious form. So I didn't. The idea of comparison, I think, is overblown, right? So let's deal with that one. The next thing, look, you know what? I'm surrounded here, except for Kate. I don't know about your heritage. I'm a Caucasian, right? I'm a hillbilly, a white fella, whatever, right? And I don't get, and the people around me don't get to have a voice on The Voice. We're not entitled to, because my skin colour is the wrong colour. And a lot of people in my area, especially where there's poor white people, find that really annoying. It builds up a sense of, all my life I've been told in my area, and growing up with, we didn't call them elders, Aboriginal gentlemen, or looked after me as a kid, don't see colour. Everybody's equal. Everything's the same. Never run someone down by reason of their race. It was drilled into us. And it's really hard now to say, oh, well, hang on, except on certain occasions where we will define people by race. And that makes it, in my area, that makes it hard. The people in my areas I bring up over and over again. So two people born in the same hospital, in beds next to each other, go to the same primary school, go to the same high school, and live next to each other in the same village. And one gets a greater parliamentary right than the other person. That people have to see how that annoys people.
So you're saying The Voice will give special rights. Nova, is that the case? Do you agree with that?
No. It creates an opportunity for us as First Nations people, because since 1788 we've been discriminated against. Let's pull back and just deal with the facts. 1788, Union Jack planted, it was declared terra nullius, no man's land. So we became invisible then. But we know all the atrocities, the massacres and all the policies that happened, shifted Aboriginal people off their respective communities. Fast forward, 1901, this document, 1901 is the birth certificate of this country. Now, there were 2 references to Aboriginal people in 1901, is that the Commonwealth shall make law for whom it deems necessary for except the Aboriginal race. So the Commonwealth wasn't allowed to make law back then, so we had reference then. And the other one was the Aborigines could not be counted. So we weren't allowed to be counted as part of the Australian population. So all the states and territories enacted the Aborigines Protection Act. So we have been subjected since day dot in this country to brutal acts that have hurt our people. So 67 comes along, strikes out the 2 references to Aborigines. So we were counted, and then also gave the Commonwealth the ability to make law for Aboriginal people. Now, going back to what Barnaby was saying, I get that. I grew up in Darwin, very multicultural. I represented Australia, wore the green and gold, equal. But the reality is that whilst we may all be a part of the human race, having black skin we've been discriminated against. If you were to say you were Aboriginal, you were immediately the stereotyping, all that sort of stuff would discriminate again. Now, it's a very simple thing what we're asking, going back to what Kate is saying, the birth certificate of this country does not include the firstborn. Now, Barnaby's talking about him being a Caucasian. Clearly, I've got black skin. People know I'm a black Aboriginal woman, but I did my DNA test a couple of years ago during COVID, and I came back. I had Scottish blood, Irish blood, Filipino blood. Now, I knew that. But then you go this scientific thing of the DNA ancestry. I click on Scottish, it took me back to Scotland. I click on the Irish, and it took me back to Ireland. I click on the Filipino, it took me back to the Philippines. I clicked on Aboriginal, it took me to this continent. We don't come from anywhere else on this planet except this. And it's a very simple thing to do to be able to acknowledge us as the firstborn. Our DNA exists in this continent. So give us that ability. That's all we're asking. And this is beyond politics. Longy and I are talking, this is beyond politics. This is about humanity and the ability to see us for who we are as the firstborn. And when laws are made against us, because John Howard suspended legislation, the Racial Discrimination Act, to enact the Northern Territory intervention, which he used 5126, the Race Act. It was the only time the Army came in, and we have been hurt by that. So if we had something that was like the ACCC, the consumer watchdog, we could say to the next Prime Minister who wants to hurt our people, on what grounds are you enacting the Northern Territory intervention? On what grounds are you discriminating on race? We've been the most hurt people on this continent for 250 years. And I'm so glad that there is a Liberals for Yes, because this is above politics. This is about humanity, dignity, and doing what's right for this country. And the Constitution is a birth certificate, and you've left the firstborn off. We don't belong anywhere else apart from here.